Okay, everybody, welcome back. Welcome to segment 2 of Hate Live, which is the Back in the Day segment. And tonight we've got a very, very special episode of Back in the Day because for the very first time I'm opening up and being honest about Evolution 2005. This is an event that for many people they thought was highly controversial. I'll explain why. And it's a very unique situation, a unique time in my life for what was going on. The years of 2005 through 2007 were the years where I was incredibly into and dedicated to Street Fighter. I was playing it all the effing time. My free time was all Street Fighter. My travel was all Street Fighter. All my money for my, went into this hobby that was Street Fighter. And in the year 2005, to give you guys some perspective, I had been traveling around and playing in certain tournaments regionally in around the East Coast. And in particular, I had been trying to play Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. That's the game that started it all and really made Street Fighter a competitive force on the map. Up to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, there were different versions of Street Fighter 2 that had been released, but never had anyone really said, wow, this game feels balanced. This game really feels like this is a tournament level game. And finally, that game it introduced so many things like supers. For the very first time, you could have a super move that you get by fighting and getting hit, and also doing combos and stuff. You tech hit throws, where when you get thrown, you can reduce the damage or escape the throw. All those were concepts, all introduced by that game. And so that game kind of became the quintessential top of the heap when it came to competitive fighting games. Now, this is a funny story. I didn't play that game when it was new. When that game was new, my local arcade didn't get it. I was busy playing other games that had come out in the meantime, like Mortal Kombat and Killer Instinct and stuff like that. And it wasn't until much later that my arcade got things like Street Fighter Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, and then I got back into Street Fighter 3, and of course the Versus series, Marvel vs. Capcom, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, etc., etc. So, excuse me. So, I didn't play any console games at all during this era. I missed out on the entire, PS2 era of gaming because I was so busy playing Street Fighter. Now, in particular, I liked Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and I liked Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I was not as good at Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as I was at Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, but I actually played it more. So at the time, I had been traveling to places like Texas and Philadelphia and stuff like that. I would go all around the country traveling and participating in these tournaments. And incidentally, it was around this time period when I met John Rambo for the first time, and we became friends and later on travel companions going to all those tournaments. But that's not the point of this story. The point of this story is, in the year of 2005, it was a unique and really tumultuous year for me because I had moved out of my parents' house, got a 3-bedroom apartment that I was sharing with 2 roommates in more northern Connecticut. It is actually still southern Connecticut, but it's the northern part of southern Connecticut, because I wanted to move next to my job. At the time, I was working for a place called Wells Fargo Financial. It was a place that gave out mortgages, credit cards, personal loans. But the catch here, which they didn't disclose to me when I was getting hired, is that it was basically mostly to people with bad credit, and we gave incredibly high interest rates, but the catch was we would give it to people with incredibly bad credit, and what we would do is, let's say, for example, these people really are in dire straits. They can't pay their bills anymore. They've got $20,000 in credit card debt. They have no money to pay, and so all their bills are past due. We would give them loans for up to almost 100% of the value of their house to pay off their credit cards. And of course, we'd charge them an exorbitant amount of money in interest to do it. But for them, they would see it as savings. Hey, at least we can now make the payment monthly and we're not going delinquent and it's not killing our credit. The problem was 2 things. Number one, a lot of these people, they already racked up $20,000 in credit card debt and then they put that on a mortgage. Guess what? I'm going to go do it again because now all my credit cards are free and clear. So they racked themselves right back to the situation that they were in, only this time they had no equity in their home to solve the problem. Number 2, the housing market crashed, and so even though we may have given them 100% of the value of their home on the loan, guess what? Now their home value is only this. They have a loan for twice the amount of money as what their house is worth. So all this was happening while I worked there. And quite honestly, I had a manager who didn't like me at all. We weren't compatible. He lived one kind of a lifestyle, I lived a different one. Not compatible, and for whatever reason he just didn't like me, and he decided that he was going to give me the worst possible leads in the office. And I struggled to even close loans because he would give me people with such low credit. I would work to try to get them a loan for 2 months, and then they would get denied in the end because their credit's so low. And I'd be like, what do you want me to do? You give me the worst possible leads in the fucking office. You do it every month to the point where I called in the district manager, the district supervisor, to tell her. But guess what? I found out she trained the guy, so she protected him. So anyway, the bottom line, the reason I'm telling you this, I was quitting. I had to get out of there. It was either going to be fired or I had to quit, okay? So I quit my job. But the thing was, that whole year, I had traveled the country to play Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and I knew that I was moving out of my apartment. I had an apartment, like I said, this 3-bedroom apartment. I knew eventually I'd be moving out, but it was still like 6 months on the lease, and I didn't know where I was going to get the money from to pay the bills. I didn't know anything at that point. I did have a job interview lined up for Best Buy in a few weeks, but basically it was like a couple of weeks before EVO. And I said, I want to go so bad because I've been practicing this, everything I've been doing, waiting for, but it was a huge risk because I didn't have the money to go. So I did one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my life, and please, I beg of you, unless you're on your last legs financially, do not ever do what I'm going to tell you I did to pay for my EVO trip. I took cash advances on all of my credit cards. So we're talking thousands of dollars in cash advances. I ended up paying off the interest alone for that for about 5 years. I'm not kidding. The reason that I had such credit card debt, and I told you just recently that I paid off all my credit card debt a year or two ago, is because that dumb decision to take out like $3,000 with cash advances on my credit cards fucked me up financially for years. So don't fucking do it unless you're destitute. Okay? Now, and by the way, I see a bunch of trolls again, so I just banned another one. Okay. So, on a whim, no job, unemployed, recently, left my job, on bad terms, by the way, because I hated the fucking manager, and I had it out with him and told him he was a fucking asshole, and that he doesn't know how to run a branch, and the only reason he had his job is because basically his district manager is a fucking cocksucker and protected his ass, because I would have had him fucking fired for the shit. I actually found out he was illegally granting loans to certain people, which I'm not even going to get into. I will not get into it here. Okay. So, on a whim, I go out to EVO. Now, the thing is, I didn't go with anyone. I went by myself on my own ticket. I remember the flight sucked. It was a flight. This is the dumbest flight I've ever heard of. Wait till you hear this. So, my flight left from Connecticut, flew from Connecticut to New York, and then from New York to the West Coast. So, the flight from Connecticut to New York was the worst flight I've ever been on. It was a tiny fucking plane. Only me and one other woman were on it. I don't understand how that worked. It was the most crazy-ass turbulence I've ever been in my life. It literally felt like you were on a roller coaster, and a giant head roller coaster in his hands was going like this. That's what the flight fucking felt like, so that was awful. When I finally got out there, I ended up, taking a taxi or whatever to the venue. Now, at the time, EVO was being held in Vegas. It still is held in Vegas, but at that time, they were trying to every year have a different place on the Strip. I don't particularly remember what casino they were at that year, but they were at a casino. I do remember that much. And I didn't have any roommates or anything like that. I did have enough money, luckily, let me think about that now. Did I have my own room? I can't even remember. I don't think I had my own room. I think because I had so little money, I ended up rooming with a bunch of people from Maryland who I knew because they're cool. They're real cool people. They'd come up to the northern area of the East Coast to play in Street Fighter tournaments before. I think I talked to them online and arranged to stick my leg in and get a spot in their room. Isaac Graham was actually one of the people who I hung out with during that EVO. And so they were real cool. I kind of hung out with those group of players during that EVO. And I remember being pretty much alone. No one else from my area, the East Coast, no one from Connecticut had gone to EVO. And that could be a daunting thing. When you're going up in a tournament, it's a nationals tournament. And yeah, it's an open thing and anyone can enter. But back then, keep in mind, Street Fighter 4 wasn't out. It was a much smaller event. And it was a lot more daunting because almost everyone there is a killer player. They've been playing forever. There's no opportunity to play multiple levels of people who aren't very good before you get to someone who's good because the tournaments were much smaller. So, well, looks like we got more lag on the stream, everyone. Isn't that great? Anyway, so I go out there by myself pretty much, you know, kind of nervous because I've never been out there to the West Coast by myself before. But I said, I'm just going to do it. To hell with it. Shoot the J. This may be, my final opportunity because I don't even have a job. I don't know if I'm going to find another job. Let me just do this, get it out of the way, and I get it out of my system, and maybe I'll never go to EVO again. Who knows? If I have no money, there's no way I can go to EVO ever again. And here's the thing about EVO 2005 that was so controversial. Anyone who played Super Turbo at the time will tell you this. This was a time period when EVO was adjusting to the times. At the time, arcades were going out of business. The pastime of going to your local arcade on a stand-up cabinet and playing with someone in person, those days were going away. What had happened is that recently, games such as Third Strike and Super Turbo had been released on the Xbox, and people were playing them on the Xbox online. And so they were playing that way. Now, it was incredibly laggy, and it was very hard to learn anything, but that was the best you got back there then, okay? And what EVO decided to do is they wanted to, for the first time, they wanted to convert their tournament from an all-arcade cabinet tournament to all consoles. The problem with doing that was that there weren't widely accepted console versions of these arcade games that people felt were arcade perfect. So, for example, with the exception of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, every game had a difference from the arcade version. Capcom vs. SNK 2 ran much faster on consoles than it did on the arcade boards, so you had to actually be faster and have better hand-eye coordination to be better on it on consoles. Third Strike, or Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, had several differences from the arcade version that a lot of people eventually forgot about because everyone just got used to the console versions and played that. But Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo by far had a bad run when it came to console versions. In this particular case, they decided that for EVO 2K5, 2005, they were going to use the PlayStation 1 version from the Street Fighter collection of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And what a gaffe that was, because people were like, oh, we can't find that game. The game's like 3 years old. It's hard to get your hands on now. A lot of people, didn't like that version of the game. In fact, I'll tell you that right now, that version of the game is far from arcade perfect. It's got tons of differences. Lots of timing issues, hitboxes that were changed, damage level output that was changed. There's a lot about that game that was changed on the console version, the PS1 version in particular. And so what ended up happening was, there was controversy because all the old school Super Turbo players who traditionally attended EVO, okay, and played on arcade cabinet, said, well, how are we going to do this? We've always played on arcade cabinet. That's the real definitive version, and you're telling us to play an inferior version that is not the same as the arcade. And so some old school players put up a big stink. One of them, I'll tell you right now, was Alex Valle. I don't want to play on console. This is bullshit. Of course, later on, everything became console. It didn't matter anymore what these guys said. They ended up playing on console regardless because it was what they did at EVO. But at the time, it was this big controversial thing. We don't like this, blah, blah, blah. Now, let me tell you guys something. I, in particular, got into Super Turbo after the days when it was a new game. I started playing it around the year 2000 in arcades. It was like, I would play Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as my primary game, but whenever I wasn't playing that, I would head over to Super Turbo and play that for hours. And it was known as the thinking man's game because at its core, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo is not a complex game. There's only like there's only 16 characters in it. Well, I guess you could say there's more than that if you count Akuma. So, alright, there's a limited amount of character selection. A lot of the characters have similarities, right? Very basic system. There's no gimmicks in that game. In that game, the new gimmick was basically super moves, because that was the game that introduced them. And you could probably, in a couple days of playing it, learn a few characters and be able to play it at a decent competitive level, okay? The trick here is in the nuances. They called it the old man's fighter because the people who'd played that game for years and knew these little tricks, these little timing things that they could use to beat even the peer person who's been playing it for a year, and they think that they're really good. That guy would all of a sudden pull something out from his old knowledge that you didn't know, and boom, you lose. And that's kind of the game that it was known as. And I was actually a newcomer to the game, considered a newcomer to the game when I was playing it around this time period. People would say, oh, he may be good, but you know what? He wasn't from back in the day, so he's not an OG. That's what they call them, OG, because they think they're gangsters or something. It stands for original gamer, but they call them OGs like, oh, we're original gangsters. Yeah, okay, because you play Street Fighter in a fucking arcade, you're a gangster. Whatever you say, dude. But yeah. I was considered the new kid on the block. And so for me to get respect was like impossible. You're playing Super Turbo, you want respect. You're a kid, you're young. You know, people who are playing Super Turbo are all in their 30s. You're only in your 20s. Who do you think you are to be playing this game? Yada, yada, yada. So, I go out there and I'm going to very shortly reveal something that's going to piss off a lot of people, but I'm not going to reveal it yet. We're going to get to it. So I go out there, and I immediately notice there's an arcade cabinet for Super Turbo, but I'm like, but that's not arcade Super Turbo. What is it? Well, there's a guy, his name was Cigar Bob. I have no idea if he's still around, but at the time, he was an OG, that's what they called him, an OG, whatever, who back in the day was known for playing Super Turbo, but he actually owned arcade cabinets, he built his own cabinets, and he actually built this custom setup where you could have different joystick types and things installed in this cabinet, and it would hook up to a TV that two people could play on. So you could play PlayStation 1 Super Turbo with your style of controller or joystick, almost like you're at an arcade. Okay? And that's what everyone was playing on during this entire tournament. Of course, they had other setups, and they were very, by the way, back then, unheard of to play on a pad. If you were trying to play Street Fighter on a pad, you were shunned. Wow, what a dick. Look at that guy, he's not doing it right. He needs a joystick. Because that's what it was. Everyone grew up in arcades, so that was the way to play, with a joystick and buttons. You were actually made fun of if you played on a pad back then. And so basically, what everyone ended up doing for 2 days before the actual EVO event happened is practice the fuck out of the PlayStation 1 version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and tried to learn the differences in the game. Now, it's funny to me because I was there, Cigar Bob was there, there were a bunch of people there who I was very friendly with and I was playing, but it was none of the OGs, right? It wasn't the guys who were synonymous, the Mike Watsons, the Alex Valles, the John Choi's. None of them were the people who were really playing. It was other people who were playing and trying to basically learn the differences between PS1 Super Turbo and Arcade Super Turbo. So when we actually played in the tournament, we know what we were doing. Right? Instead of bitching about it, which is what it seemed all the OGs were doing, we'll just play the game and learn the differences so we know for the tournament. So for 2 days, I was intense amounts of practice and training, basically, for PlayStation 1 Super Turbo, and during that period of time, I learned some major differences about the game, including the fact that some characters were different sizes. They weren't as tall or as short as they were supposed to be, and they had different hitboxes. I found out certain characters did different stun amounts than they did in Arcade Super Turbo. I found out that one of my characters, Vega, was incredibly easy to do these complex combos with, which actually was harder to do in the arcade version of the game. So for me, I was like, wow, I might have gotten off a little easy here because my character's actually better. Now, anyone who practiced knew that. The problem was people were, it's Super Turbo, I'll just show up and I'll just play, right? Because they think, I've been playing this since the 90s, I don't need to practice or anything for all these newcomers that are here, fuck them. So, what ended up happening was, finally, after 2 days of practice, this tournament starts. And the way that it worked is that it was like a gauntlet. You started in a pool. You had to win a certain amount of wins in your pool to move on and advance to the bracket. Once you advanced to the bracket, you had to win a certain amount of wins to get to the finals, the top 8 that took place on Sunday. So pools were Friday, the bracket was Saturday, finals were Sunday. So I come in on Friday, you know, ready to go. And I was trying to be very, very laid back, very relaxed, and very calm, not cocky at all or anything like that during this tournament, because I knew I was in foreign territory. I was in enemy territory. I had no friends there. Everyone was a competitor. And I remember playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and losing and getting all pissed off, saying, fuck, I love this game and I always fucking lose at it. Pisses me off, right? Got all pissy and moany. And then I played Super Turbo. And in my bracket for Super Turbo were 2 great players. One of them's name was Bob Painter, who is a traditional E-Honda player. He's known, you know, throughout the world as an E-Honda player, really well trained one, and he is considered an OG. Okay, there was also another person I really admit I can't remember who he was. He was known for his Vega. Okay, now here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to fighting games. If you really want to be good at the game, you can't be a one-trick pony. And what I mean by that is a lot of these pro players only get good with one character, and then they end up having mismatches. They end up having situations where they're always at a disadvantage if someone counter picks them or has a character. Your main is basically considered a counter to your character. And a lot of the OGs, unfortunately, are one character player. Bob Painter only plays Honda. He could try playing other characters, but when it comes to tournaments, only plays Honda. The other guy only plays Vega, right? When you really think about it, John Choi, he usually only plays Ryu. Every once in a while, he'll pick Old Sagat, but he usually picks Ryu. Same thing with Valle. Usually picks Ryu. He'll have one or two others, but almost 99% of the time, he's going to play with Ryu. So these guys are character specialists. They're not jack of all trades. Me, let me give you an idea of the cast of characters that I use in Super Turbo. DJ, so projectile zoning character with some offense mixed in there. Balrog, a rushdown style character. Vega, who can be played both as rushdown and a keep away style character. So those are my three mains when it comes to tournaments. Very, very different gameplay depending on what character I pick. So what I found is when I was going into this tournament, I had an advantage because I had a variety of stuff I could alternate through. So I remember playing Bob Painter and I said, he only picks Honda. This is a shoo-in. DJ, guess what? I ran through Bob Painter. Like, I'm not saying I beat him. I mean, like, I destroyed him. Because it's a complete counter match if you know how to play the match correctly. And I do. And I destroyed him. I think he was like, what the fuck just happened? Like, this kid who everyone considers an upstart, you know, a kid who's not an OG, just whooped an OG's ass. And there was like 2 or 3 other people in my bracket who I didn't know, and I beat them pretty convincingly. And then finally I got to the Vega player. And I said, well, you know, I'm not going to pick Vega, so I don't remember if it was Balrog or DJ, but I knew the match, and I beat this guy. So now I made it into the main bracket, and everyone was giving me a pat on the back that day, congratulations, and it was kind of funny because if you got out of your pool, you were called a qualifier, because you qualified for day 2. And it was funny because the people who I was hanging out with, remember I said I was hanging out with kind of the Maryland, Baltimore people, it was like Isaac Grant qualified for Marvel vs. Capcom 2, great. You know, I qualified for Super Turbo, great. Someone else qualified for CVS 2, great. And this one poor guy who was with us didn't qualify for anything, so we pranked him. That morning when we woke up, we said, well, we're all going to qualifiers breakfast this morning. And he goes, what's that? It says, it's a breakfast that you go to if you qualified for today. You can't go if you didn't, so we'll see you later. And we left the room. Oh my God, it was so funny. We left the room, and we were like halfway down the hall, and then we turned around and came back, and the guy was like sitting on the bed like this, by himself, like sad as hell. We're like, there's no qualifiers breakfast, you idiot. Get down here with us. It was so funny. We pranked the shit out of him. That was really funny. So, day 2 was quite the ordeal, and here's why I say that. First of all, I have to bring this up. Alex Valle did not enter this tournament. Basically, he claimed he was busy and he couldn't show up. Bullshit. He was like, oh, I'm protesting Evo because they're not holding Arcade Super Turbo. I don't want to enter or whatever, right? Yet he was still there, but he didn't enter. He did not enter the tournament. So, just to give you an idea of the gauntlet of killers, and I'm going to name some names now, people who I played and beat that day in the Super Turbo for the PS1, that you might be like, what the fuck? Jason Wilson, Mike Watson. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure I played John Choi and I beat him too. I apologize because this is a long time ago, almost 10 years ago. I'm almost positive I played Choi and he played Old Sagat and I beat him too. Because he could not do a Tiger Uppercut. Because I'm going to explain to you how funny this situation was. And one other person. I beat like 4 killers. Like OG, highly respected, known back in the day for being tournament winners. I ran through everyone. And at the end of that day, people were coming up to me like, what the fuck, dude? Like, you're on fire. You're like the hottest thing right now. You're the hot commodity. We got to hang out with you. Maybe some of that luck will rub off on us. I was like, all right. Here's the thing, okay? Those guys didn't fucking practice. what those guys did, they sat and they bitched and moaned about, oh, it's not Arcade Super Turbo. I don't want to play PS1 Super Turbo. Wah, wah, wah. Instead of sitting down, which is what I did, sat down with the game for 2 days, played the fuck out of it, and I learned all the differences of the game. And once I knew all the differences of the game, I knew what was going to work in the tournament and what wasn't. These guys, to give you some perspective, because this is pretty funny, right? They needed to play on joystick, okay? But some of them were used to stand up. So, just to give you some perspective, this is, I'm saying, let's say this is the cabinet. So your hands would be like this and your buttons would be like this. And when you push the buttons, nothing happens. If you have a loose joystick that you're playing with like today on your lap, and you try to slam the buttons, the thing goes all over the place and you lose your bearings. These guys were used to being able to play in arcades where they could really yank on the fucking thing and do it, and it wouldn't move. So their play style actually didn't convert to console gameplay. It just didn't work. And so it was funny because I remember John Choi had this gigantic monstrosity of it was basically a giant wooden box that looked like, 6 buttons and a joystick that was mounted on these like 2x4s that went down into this fucking base of this thing, like a giant piece of plywood that it was drilled into. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And he's standing there trying to play, and as he's trying to play with it, the thing is wobbling all around like it's like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It was going like this all over. So he's trying to play people. Oh, I'm gonna do Tiger Uppercut when they jump. He wouldn't get it, and then you get destroyed. A big combo. The thing was hilarious. Like, it was laughable because no one wanted to laugh at him because he's an OG. But the thing's going like this. I'm like, how could he fucking play on that? Like, what is he thinking? So it was quite interesting. So, the bottom line is, by the end of the day, I literally beat like 5 more OG players. The only person I had lost to in the tournament is someone I've never effing beaten Super Turbo. His name's Bucktooth. I don't even know if he fucking plays anymore. I really don't. But I could never beat that motherfucker. He was from Texas. He's an Asian guy, and he usually was known for games such as Third Strike and CVS 2. But he played Super Turbo over the years. He was pretty good. I could never fucking beat this guy. His Chun-Li, I don't know, it always got my goat for whatever reason. So it was funny because I lost to him and got sent to the loser's bracket. But then as I went through the loser's bracket, I literally cleaned out the fucking bracket, beating everyone. So now it's a huge controversy because guess what? Finals day. Guess how many OGs were in the finals? 0. They didn't make it. They all got eliminated. They all fucked up in the early stages of the tournament and lost. They didn't make it to the finals. So there was such, oh, how could this be a Super Turbo tournament if the original gamers didn't make it to the finals? Maybe they should have fucking practiced the game. Okay? And so I go to the finals, and my first match is against NKI, who is he's an American, but he lived in Japan for a while, so he's very into Japanese culture, and he plays Chun-Li exclusively. And I've played this guy in tournament before, and he beat me almost every time, right? So we're in tournament, and you can actually watch this. This was recorded. It was on the Evo 2005 DVD. The match I had with him, I played Vega against his Chun-Li, and I ended up beating him. So now I was in the position, boom, if I win like 1 to 2 more matches, I could win the whole event. And then my final match in the tournament was against Tokido, who picked a mirror. We did a mirror match of Vega. And he knew a few things about Vega that I didn't about the mirror match. And just because he knew those few things, he got the jump on me. And I remember distinctly making 1 to 2 major blunders that people were like, why did he do that? I don't know. I was on the stage. I was playing in front of 1,000 or 2 people. And I was, I fucked up, I admit. He beat me. And so what ended up happening, I got 4th place. The top 3 places were all Japanese players. So I ended up basically being the highest ranking American for Super Turbo that year, which was so much, Dark Side Phil, he placed that high in a tournament. How could this is bullshit. This just proves that console versions will never be accepted. Of course, today, for every game except Super Turbo, we all play console versions because this was where it was going. But those OGs just didn't want to let go, okay? Now, after the tournament, basically Valle shows up. Oh, that's a joke tournament. Let's have the real tournament now. And we all went to a hotel room. We moved that giant cigar bob cabinet into the hotel room, and we actually hooked up Arcade Super Turbo, and we had like the tournament after the tournament after the tournament. Now keep in mind, it's like the middle of the night. It's like 2, 3 a.m., and they wanted me to be in it. I said, fine, I'll be in it, but I was tired and I lost. And they're like, oh, see, so Phil, got that high in the tournament, but now he lost quick in this one. Obviously, that means that he sucks and it means nothing. No, it means that I was in the fucking tournament room playing games all day and winning, right? While you weren't even fucking here. You show up after the event and now you want to play me competitively when I'm all drained from playing all weekend. It's bullshit. They're all, oh, I beat him after. Doesn't like that matters. No. Evo results will forever show I was the best Super Turbo player that year, period. It doesn't matter if you put 4,000 asterisks next to it, if you say that you had my toe hurt that day, or I had the sniffles and I couldn't play, my joystick wouldn't stop spinning like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I won. And no one can take that shit away from me, okay? Now, the final thing that I'm going to say, and this is going to piss fucking people off. I know it is. Because I lied to everyone and I said, oh yeah, dude, I've been playing Super Turbo like crazy. I've been going nuts playing it, practicing for Evo, and I really put in... The truth of the matter is this, I shit you not. I went to Evo to play Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I didn't go there to play Super Turbo. In fact, I didn't have a local arcade that had Super Turbo. In fact, I didn't own Super Turbo. I had no means to practice Super Turbo. The only time that I ever played Super Turbo was when I went to a tournament to play something else, and they happened to have a Super Turbo cabinet there. Never did I ever actively practice the hell out of Super Turbo up until 2005, and the bottom line is, the first time I ever played the PS1 version of the game was at Evo. I never touched it besides then. So, literally, because I wasn't being a whiny bitch about it being the PS1 version of the game, in 2 days, I learned enough of the PS1 version to basically be the best player at it at Evo, which if these OGs had just bothered to do that, instead of whining and bitching and stamping their feet and complaining about the controls, they might have done better, right? But instead, they wanted to be the whiners and the complainers because they can't get their way, and they left the door wide open for me to step in and take the whole thing, which is what I did. So, how do you like that? 2 days of practice, and I beat every OG in the building just because I was the one who was willing to put in the time and effort and to dedicate myself to learn the version of the game instead of the people who just wanted to whine and complain about it. And that's literally as soon as I got home. Oh, that victory means nothing. It's an empty victory because it's PS1 version. I'm like, I didn't pick the version of the game. Evo did. I practiced the version that was at Evo and I won. Maybe you should have done that too. And since then, oh, that was it. Phil's a dick. Well, how dare he speak to people like that? Whatever. You know what? The bottom line is, no one can ever take that placing away from me, right? And in future years, I ended up winning Evo qualifiers and stuff in other versions of Super Turbo, so you can't just say I was only the best at that one version. In subsequent versions that they played at Evo, I also did very well in. But that was the 1 year where everything kind of came together. It was nuts. And it was funny because when I got back from this trip, I actually ended up getting the job at Best Buy. It ended up paying a decent amount of money. And I was able to at least afford the bills, stay in the apartment, the 3-bedroom apartment that I was in at the time, and basically support myself for years to come. I could never pay down the credit cards until I did this YouTube thing. And then this YouTube thing tremendously has helped me to pay off my credit card debt. And now, now I'm going back into debt because I'm moving. Great. All right. So, excuse me. So, there you have it. Oh my god, look at it. Already we got an idiot. Fort isn't taking the whole thing, blah, blah, blah. Shut up. You know what? I didn't say I won Evo. I said I was the highest placing American. Enjoy your lifetime ban, idiot. Okay.